Okay, so with the new announcements of the restrictions easing, what teams and players are now looking at now is a return to training in and around the end of June. Now that's all fine, but the biggest problem I have and can foresee happening is that when teams go back to training, there's going to be no exit plan, and players are just going to be thrown back into the deep end for conditioning, and it's what usually happens in and around pre-season anyway. So there needs to be a gradual easing in of certain conditioning protocols for players, especially those who haven't really been following anything for the last 12 weeks. And part of that and the energy systems development articles I've been writing as well, I'm going to put together some very short conditioning sessions that you can run yourself, or if you are a coach watching this, you can actually implement them in your first session back, first couple of sessions back, to gradually ease your players into getting some conditioning done. Usually I split up the conditioning into one of two areas. It'll either be a tempo running session or it'll be a mass running session. I've spoken about mass before at length, especially with my own clients and teams that I've worked with, and there is some very clear differences between the two, and hopefully by watching this and the second video that comes after this, you'll be able to identify which one is going to suit you better, and where to insert each one depending on where you are in your training week, and a block of training as well. So this video itself is going to cover tempo training, and tempo has become my new favorite for my own training and also for my clients, because it fits in with the philosophy around trying not to do too much but doing as much as you need to get the adaptations that you want. So when it comes to training with tempo, what you actually get is you get an opportunity to accumulate a lot of high speed running without the accumulation of fatigue to go along with that as well, which is obviously key. What most of you notice is that when it comes to conditioning training, the longer this session goes on, the more fatigue starts to set in. Running mechanics tend to go out the window, and you get people just running poorly for the last maybe 5 to 10 minutes of training in an attempt just to get the session done. With tempos, you don't actually get that, so you can actually maintain the same optimal running technique for the entire session while still covering the same distance that you would in a regular conditioning session. Because the recovery time between each rep is longer, what you don't get is you don't get as much lactate produced in the muscle. Recovery times between sessions is then shorter, so you don't end up having to spend maybe 2 to 3 days recovering from that specific session before you go and do another one. And it also fits players who are training pretty much every day. So if you are training for multiple sports and you're looking to get some extra conditioning in which isn't very taxing, tempo is a good way of adding in an extra bit without it affecting much else. Some of the problems with it as well though, unless you're sure of exactly why you're doing it, there is a lot of waiting around. There is a lot of pause in between the reps because the rest time is that little bit longer, so it can seem a little bit too easy, but that's fine. If you're doing this in a large group, unless you've obviously educated your players on why you're doing it, players can tend to get fed up with having to do it because it seems boring, and we've been so conditioned to everything being difficult that because it feels easy, players feel like it's not beneficial for them. But we must educate them on why it is, and this is part of the reason why. Go and check out that energy systems development article, both of them, part 1 and 2, for a little bit more of, I suppose, biochemistry around why training tempos is important for us. Most importantly, I suppose we've got to go through how to actually do it. It can range in setup, but more often than not, it's kind of the same template. Distances can be manipulated depending on your sport, your position within that sport, and if you are coming off the back of not doing an awful lot of training, or if you're in the midst of a program itself and you're trying to do a little bit more. So the easiest way to set it up is tempos are usually run at roughly around 70% of your maximal speed. Most people won't know what the top speed is, so trying to gauge that is a little bit more challenging. So usually we work it off the notion that most people, field sport athletes, should be able to hit roughly around 9 meters per second. We use meters per second because it's a little bit easier then to program for entire squad, and then just to get a reference point, if you want to get it in kilometers an hour, if you just multiply that by 3.6, so 9 meters per second is about 32 kilometers an hour. So gives you a rough idea of how fast that is. To get 70% of that, again, very simple, just multiply it by 70%. So 9 meters per second would equate to about 6.3 meters per second. So usually when we're programming these for people who we don't have a lot of information for, usually sits around 5 to 6 meters per second for your tempos. This is a good starting point, and then you're looking at your reps being about 80 meters long, so between 60 and 100 meters depending on your position. If your position requires you to not have to run that far, then obviously stick to the shorter end. If you're, I suppose, again, a midfielder in any field sport, you're going to have to recover a lot more distance, so stick to the higher end. You're going to look to cover that distance then based on that speed. So again, that's the benefit of programming it for meters per second as opposed to in kilometers an hour. If we're using the 6 meters per second mark, if you look at someone who's been programmed for 100 meters, then they're looking to cover that 100 meters in about 16 seconds. For those of you using the lower end and you're looking at 60 meters, again, you're going to try and cover that in about 10 seconds. So it is relatively high speed. It's not a sprint. You should be able to get into some relaxed rhythm for all of your reps. And then the way you set it up is then, so if you know your distance, you know your rough timing, so you're going to cover 100 meters in 16 seconds. I'm going to set a rolling clock then usually for about between 60 and 75 seconds. So you're going to run a rep, so cover that 100 meters in 16 seconds. The timer just is on a rolling clock, so you use the first 16 seconds of that 75-second time period to complete your run, and then you use the rest of that time then to recover from it, and then you just repeat that for your required reps. Usually you do about 3 sets of 8 with a 3-minute break in between, and it's that. It is very, very straightforward. So if you are setting up in 3 sets of 8, about 24 reps, so overall you're looking at approximately about 2 kilometers covered in total of high speed running, which again fits with the research around most sports, that the amount of distance that you're going to cover at those specific speeds. So hopefully that helps. I will leave a little bit of a template below so you can go ahead and download that and use it yourself, and yeah, that's it.